I guess I should say, before anything else, Mary and I know each other. We're buds. We met through the work in the Administrator Researcher Campus Climate Collaborative, ARC3, the survey that Tulane used. We were part of the group that made that, and we also met Jennifer there, which was a big lesson in, yes, you should meet your heroes, because it ends up being incredibly fulfilling, because Jennifer's research blew my mind when I was at Dartmouth and made me go, oh, yeah. So with
you were part of it.
I know, yeah, right. So before though we talk more about restorative justice, I want to talk about the work that you've done in researching sexual assault itself, because the questions that we asked on our climate survey came from the SES that you created, and it has been really disappointing to still see that today there is so much pushback against what we know about sexual assault. And even just a few days ago, Casey Johnson, who's a historian at a university around New York, was yet again railing against how 1 in 4 is not accurate, and all of those other lovely denial things. And so I just wanted to know from you, the person who has been studying this for decades, how do we push back against this questioning of sexual violence being like real?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the question. Second of all, do you think I'm Trump? Because nobody told me I had white stuff on my shirt throughout my whole talk. Anyway, it's gone now. Got the toilet paper off my shirt. This is a great question, because actually the work I'm doing now, the data that were collected for the survey that generated that 1 in 4, the data were collected in 1985. And in 2015, we collected a new data set using as identical methods as possible. So we are now through the data analysis. I know the results, but I'm going to present them at American Psychological Association in August, and I don't want to tell you about them now. But the paper is called Then and Now, and it is a 30-year comparison of the numbers. You know, first of all, because there's a crisis of replication in psychology, so can we reproduce these original numbers? Because there's huge methodological differences that have happened over the years. The questions are asked different ways. First they used, we used pen and pencil, then they used computers and face-to-face interviewers, and now they've gone to online. And so it's really hard to compare now and then. And that's why we think this will be an impactful paper, because we'll be able to say, look, pencil and paper 30 years apart, same questions 30 years apart, done with students, done in groups as much as possible. I can tell you we could reproduce the results, the statistical, all the data we're reanalyzing. Yes, in the meantime, there come studies that are now quoted that say 1 in 5. I want to shoot them because the study from which that comes did not count intoxication rape as a form of rape, and it did not include attempts. And it was limited only to rapes that happened in college. It didn't take into account rapes that happened in high school that people brought the impacts of to college with them. And so I think 1 in 5 actually is in some ways an indefensible number. The most recent stuff to come out, like the American Association of Universities, there's 75 of them, but only 27 participated. The participation rate at our university was 14%, whereas in our surveys it's 98%. Without making it clear to you, they have a 1 in 4 number, right? So they tell their members, we're good, 1 in 4. But what you don't realize is they define everything as sexual assault. it was a very, and the irony of this is that this is what the original 87 paper, sources 1 and 4, was criticized for, was having an elastic definition of rape that included everything. Whereas it didn't, really. It included FBI legally defined rape and attempted rape. And it was 1 and 4 then, and stay tuned for what it is now.
As you, as we are looking at research, I think it's helpful, I think research should inform our practice. It was starting to integrate research into the work that I was doing, starting with Jennifer's, and then what I've learned from everything in the ARC3 group helped me immensely. But I think it's hard sometimes for non-researchers to be able to distinguish what's a good survey, what's a bad survey, what's a good outcome, what's a bad outcome. And you can see this in particular, I think, with perpetration research. Is there anything that you would say to us, for those who aren't researchers in the room, how do we best distinguish what good sexual violence research looks like? Is there any tips that you would give to us? As we look at everything, all of the news that's coming to us that says it's sexual violence is like this or that, how do we be more discerning consumers of research?
Well, first of all, I set out when I originally wrote my survey because I was trained in a certain tradition where actually my background is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's a 566 question long substitute for a comprehensive clinical exam of a psychiatric patient. So it really scores you into psychiatric diagnosis categories. Well, on a questionnaire like that, I mean, you can't say, you know, do you have delusions of grandeur? You have to, like, explain, do you believe that you worked for the CIA at some point in your life? You have to ask specific ways in which delusions of grandeur would behaviorally be expressed. So I was very influenced by Susan Braunmiller's 1971 book, where she talked about she documented the social reasons why we didn't know about all the rape cases that were happening. And it encouraged me to, there's a whole backstory, but we don't have time for it. It encouraged me to say, take my training in writing things behaviorally specific and apply it to, you know, make the same assumptions. Just like you can't ask people, are you an alcoholic, do you have delusions of grandeur, you know, do you have schizophrenic symptoms? You can't ask people, have you been raped, have you been coerced into sex against your will? They're not specific enough. People don't know what you're talking about. So I wrote the survey initially to just be a behaviorally specific way of asking people about penetration and a whole spectrum of unwanted sexual acts without using any professional jargon. As a scientist, I put in a question, have you been raped? Have you ever been raped? And when I first got the printout of the results, it was like, oh my God, I've just wasted several years of my life because I'm identifying this rate of rape victims, and this much tinier number says that they've ever been raped. So I've got a real, from a scientific perspective, reliability problem. You ask one way, you get one answer. You ask another way, you get another answer. And then I've had two aha experiences in my career. And this was the first one where I suddenly realized, wait a minute, it's possible that people have penetration experiences against their will, through force, threat of force, or when they are incapacitated, and they don't realize that that's rape, or they don't call it rape. And that's the genesis of the book that came out in 1988 based on this work, and was just reissued in 2019. I never called it rape, which is the Ms. Guide to, fighting, surviving, and avoiding date and acquaintance rape. so that's where I never called it rape came from. And then I moved on to continuing, this work right up to the present. I mean, collecting data in 2015.
Yeah. What was the second aha moment in your career?
I knew that was coming. The second aha moment came from having studied women from the community who were recent victims of rape, and interviewing them face to face using nurses or other trained health professionals over a period of 2 years to figure out what was happening in their thought processes and in their ways of seeing the world during their recovery, and how did that correlate with their social, physical, and mental health. Well, the biggest predictor of severe symptoms and long-lasting symptoms was self-blame. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night from one of those awful dreams where it was a head-on car crash. And I woke up and I thought, I'm a clinical psychologist, I should be able to analyze this dream. And so it occurred to me that what my unconscious mind was trying to tell me, preconscious mind, was that we've got an adversarial justice system that purpose is to assign blame, and as a part of assigning blame, to then administer consequences on behalf of societal norms. And on the other side, we have a victim where, to the extent that the process focuses on assigning blame and questioning that is going to lead to feelings, at least to some extent, of self-blame, we've got a car crash. And that's what got me started in being interested in restorative justice, which was in 1990. No, 2000. It was at the end of the 90s. First paper I published was in 2000. It was highly influenced by the work of Kathleen Daly, who was an American, moved to Australia and spent her career at Griffith University. She wrote a very early paper on application of what at that time was called communitarian justice, but in the US, that was interpreted as being communist justice. So that's actually where the term restorative justice, kind of its evolution was to avoid being confused with communism.
What a present. Why hasn't, given the research that you have done, and I think when all of us here, or David Karp was here a few months ago, and when you hear about restorative justice, it just seems like so obvious that this is a solution that so many people who experience sexual harassment and violence would be looking for. Why hasn't this become something that you see in more universities, and why hasn't this really taken off? And I know that the Obama administration in 2011 really,
they were not helpful.
No, they weren't, but even before that, there wasn't, you would just see, like, the University of Michigan presented at conferences, and we'd all go, oh, okay, cool. Why hasn't this taken off?
Well, it's been government interference across multiple administrations, so I'm not going to put, blame on any particular political stripe. That vagina, but we're getting people to say they want your genital, have some other term like genital opening, but we're also getting pushback of they don't want mention of body parts at all, because presenting yourself as a gender identity does not necessarily link to what kind of confirmations you've had in your body. And it's a difficult dialogue, because here's a measure whose reason for being so widely adapted is it identifies rape by using specific body parts and what's done with them. So how do you, this is an ongoing dialogue. Sorry.
Oh,
Got
no,
off track.
no, not at all. A good track for us to talk about, especially since I know that we've talked in the past about this. There's been a lot of study about particular straight female victimization. We've got a lot more room to do and grow with learning about victimization within the queer community, queer and trans communities. And then, of course, we have so much to learn still about perpetration, because our mutual friend Kevin Swartad has talked about how difficult it is to measure perpetration because people don't really want to talk about what they've done.
And institutions don't want you to collect this information.
Yes. So, because you don't want to be saying we have this many perpetrators running around. Then I think this kind of transitions into when we have reports of sexual violence, sexual harassment here, how difficult it is then to get people to reflect on their choices and how the choices they made were harmful to others. In other words, that denial. And restorative justice, encourages that accepting of, I did something that harmed another person.
Yeah.
Now, David Carpet told us that he thinks we should be incentivizing the use of restorative justice versus your traditional conduct program. If you were setting up a system at a university around restorative justice, what would it look like, and how would that interaction between the RJ and the formal conduct process look like?
Okay, first of all, RJ is not the magic pill. And in a conferencing resolution process, the university has to make a decision about people who use excessive violence beyond what is minimally necessary to compel. Or people, even though they are in the minority, that there are some serial rapists on campus, and when you're aware of people who are perpetrating and re-perpetrating, those people are not appropriate for a restorative resolution. So I want to say that up front. I don't want you to think of the whole universe. We are doing some preparation time to wait. And you also have to work with that person, the wrongdoer, because their understanding of responsibility needs to evolve. And it takes at least a year after you conduct the conference and they hear about their impact. It takes at least a year for many of these people to come to the realization of, I now understand why people saw what I did as rape, and I now understand why I harmed people. So, just to reiterate, 27% of men that we approached who were referred by prosecutors. So this wasn't just like random guys who said yes on a survey. These were people who have reported to police and went through the process of getting to prosecution. 27% of these individuals would not accept any degree of responsibility. So obviously if they were students, they'd have to go the conventional route, because restorative justice conferencing does not look back to adjudicate. It moves forward to talk about how is it affecting me now, and what did I do for what am I taking responsibility for, and how's that affecting our outer circle, because the wrongdoer has one and the victim has one. And finally, what are we going to do about it to make sure it doesn't happen again? I would just like to say that I'm also very interested in apology. I have had a personal belief, I guess, that people need to earn apologies. And so we told all our wrongdoers that they could not, should not, were strongly advised not to apologize in the conference, in the face-to-face. That there was a time to make a public apology, and it was after they completed the entire plan given to them of therapy, forensic assessment, weekly supervision, stay away, reparation, or things that were important to the victim to have happen, community service to try to repair the greater harm that was done. When that's completed, then you can apologize. And in fact, we expect you to apologize. We had to conduct ourselves under victim rights laws because we were essentially part of the justice system. And the victims have a right to attend, to be notified of any proceeding that is going to involve their perpetrator, and they have the right to attend. So, of course, when we held in front of our community board what we call the letter of reflection and reintegration, kind of a crappy name, but you know, we didn't want to call it your apology. We wanted it to be more than that. We did not have any victims who wanted to attend. We typed it up, and unless they said, I don't want to read it, we mailed it. But we did not have anybody. And I wish they would have given me the money to follow up beyond the conference with victims. So all I can say is, here's my impressions. I had a prosecutor sit next to me through one of the conferences, and one of her funny issues was the victim and her party of peer and family like didn't want to leave. And you know, those of us who worked all day, these were usually at night, we're like, oh my God, we need to get home, we're so tired. And you don't, but you would not want to like throw people out. And so they would stand around, we had drinks, I mean, you know, juice type things, soda type things, and cookies, and they would eat and they would talk, and just the prosecutor leaned to me and she said, and this lady, my age, lots of experience, she said, I have never seen a rape victim laugh before. And so it is my impression that, and from informally talking with people who called me after the fact, that many wrongdoers apologized at the conference. That was routinely not believed. The wronged person was not interested in hearing the apology, and the ones that called me said they never believed it anyway. They didn't believe it then, and they didn't believe it at the end either. We did some studies where we actually there is an apology rating scale. So we tried to determine how good were these apologies. I mean, were they not even worthy of being believed? But they were like 3/4 of the way to the best an apology can be. But even though we were extremely happy, we reached that level of remorse and realization, development of some empathy and commitment to not harming other people. We were really satisfied when looking at the wrongdoer, but realizing that we might not have done anything that was particularly helpful to survivors. However, it's a very personal choice because as you know, like let's just take that example of the shooting that happened in Atlanta at a black church Bible study group, and that group, and this is not unusual, it's not an isolated case, that group immediately wanted to forgive the perpetrator because that was coming from their Christian beliefs. The research shows actually the people who are able to forgive have a little bit, that's a facilitator of recovery. But I go nuts when the implication is that victims should forgive. And many of them are not ever going to forgive you. But they still feel the single best item that I think we asked people about their reaction to restorative justice conferencing was asking them to rate to what extent I feel like I got my power back. And 100% of the victims who talk face to face with their perpetrators felt that they were able to reclaim their power. I thought, I don't think, well, certainly you go through a Senate hearing, you did not reclaim your power. You go through a trial because our justice system is plead not guilty, and even when convicted, maintain non-guilt because there's the appeal process. And all this time, your lawyer, who may know you did something wrong, is still encouraging you in all these counter arguments and reason to blame the victim and blah, blah, blah. So the majority of victims who receive a guilty verdict still feel traumatized and still feel that they did not get the basic validation that they wanted, nor did they have any input that they wanted into the consequences. And oftentimes we're very dissatisfied with the consequences that the judge imposed.
Well, I know we've hit our time and want to open up to questions, so I will take my reintegration questions and close that. And welcome questions for Mary.
So ask me about reintegration. Yeah.
This is a question that goes back to the question that was raised about, by the way, this is amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing it. The question about the pushback, why it's so hard to make this happen on campuses. And I'm wondering if you could link maybe an answer to that question to what where you ended about reclaiming power. And this question of what it is that women want.
Yeah.
Right, when they are seeking what I would call sexual justice, right? What do they want? Because my personal anecdotes, when I'm talking to students, restorative justice seems very far from their mind about what they want. And they don't want an apology like that much as often there, but that they want somebody to be punished. But they're not always sure what that looks like or what it should be.
I got a couple things
So I was wondering if you
like
could
to say, punishing the guy is not the way we phrased it, or and it's more commonly I hear the words, I want the person to be accountable. And in this era of mass incarceration and all the racialized justice system that we widely acknowledge exists in the U.S., if not in many places as well, that it's very important to have accountability that doesn't just hinge on punishment, that has that restorative, that rehabilitative, trying to better people, not traumatize ex-felons. So I know we make contact on that part. One of the things I like about conferencing is that it's very adaptable culturally. You can conduct it in different languages. We had a victim and a wrongdoer and a victim who were both profoundly deaf and developmentally delayed adults. And the whole proceeding was conducted. Each person had their own sign language translator. It was really interesting because normally the signers, as you know, stand to the side. But because we wanted the people to make eye contact, we had the signer for the victim stand behind the person responsible and the signer for the, so you get the point. So in order to read this American Sign Language, they have to look right above the person. And that was the closest we could come to making that personal connection happen. Our area is very Hispanic. We were totally bilingual. But I'd also just like to mention this one. We had a law student who was a black man, and he was accused of raping a white woman. And he felt that in order to get pure justice, he wanted everyone involved to be Black. And so we said, okay, we asked the victim, would you be willing to be represented by a rape victim who is African American? And we recruited as her father somebody from the Urban League. And he was there, and then he had a girlfriend who was Black. So the table was surrounded by culturally similar people, as he requested. It blew me away, because race was never discussed. Because once that was taken out of the equation, the focus was on what happened. So I'm not sure Donna, I think, is going to pick up with talking, and maybe others, about transformational justice that focuses much more on power dynamics and the ways in which the status quo is not sensitive to social inequalities and inequitable distribution of resources and the intersections of rejection and many aggressions and so forth that can come from that, sexual minorities and the whole thing. So I just throw that out there, that it's not intended to be transformational justice, but by allowing cultural adaptivity, it does have some effect of addressing inequity.
Do we have time for one more question, or should we?
Yes.
All right.
Any other questions?
If you're not going to ask me a question,
I was just
my
curious.
savior.
Sorry. I was just curious, when you had the victims go through and say that they wanted to go through the restorative justice process, was there a time, or I would really like to know like the number of percentage of people that probably backed out of that? They have the confidence to do this and go through the process, but then, was there a point in some time?
Of those who consented, none dropped out. We had to cease working with somebody because she wanted $10,000. And that's that restorative justice can help pay your medical bills. We had some people a married couple wanted to go to a marriage enhancement workshop because the rape of a woman had impaired their relationship. One person was raped by a massage provider, and she wanted a year of massages from illegitimate provider. So those are some examples of what victims were seeking. Somebody brought this up before, that we find that they're mainly seeking validation. You are a wronged person. And they are seeking, I don't want this person to hurt anybody else in a similar way. So validation, and I want to have input into what happens. So those are kind of the main reasons. But you know what? I feel like I circled around and I didn't circle around to your question. Can you just give me?
You did okay.
I did okay, but I want to be perfect. So.
Well, I think the perfect piece is that you're doing this work. And I was just reading an article last night that was related to the Harvey Weinstein trial indirectly, and that there was a case in Canada where a woman went through the restorative justice process. This is not related to college campuses, though. It was another incident. But I think she felt that same validation. And so just hearing your talk helps to kind of connect that.
Yeah, and it's really helpful to mobilize your social support, because if you're treated like a legitimate victim by the system, then your support group is much more empowered to treat you like a legitimate victim and to do what they know are the right things for someone who's been wronged.
Well, I would make a plug that if you have time to ask Mary about the work that she and Elise Lopez have been doing around reintegration, because it's fascinating. But since we have time, I want to thank Mary for sharing so much with us today, and y'all join me.
So we'll take a 4-minute break.
And stay tuned for what it is now.
As we are looking at research, I think it's helpful. I think research should inform our practice. It was starting to integrate research into the work that I was doing, starting with Jennifer's, and then what I've learned from everything in the ARC3 group helped me immensely. But I think it's hard sometimes for non-researchers to be able to distinguish what's a good survey, what's a bad survey, what's a good outcome, what's a bad outcome. And you can see this in particular, I think, with perpetration research. Is there anything that you would say to us, for those who aren't researchers in the room, how do we best distinguish what good sexual violence research looks like? Is there any tips that you would give to us? As we look at everything, all of the news that's coming to us that says sexual violence is like this or that, how do we be more discerning consumers of research?
Well, first of all, I set out when I originally wrote my survey I was trained in a certain tradition where actually my background is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's a 566 question long substitute for a comprehensive clinical exam of a psychiatric patient. So it really scores you into psychiatric diagnosis categories. Well, on a questionnaire like that, I mean, you can't say, you know, do you have delusions of grandeur? You have to, like, explain, do you believe that you worked for the CIA at some point in your life? You have to ask specific ways in which delusions of grandeur would behaviorally be expressed. So I was very influenced by Susan Braunmiller's 1971 book, where she talked about she documented the social reasons why we didn't know about all the rape cases that were happening. And it encouraged me to, there's a whole backstory, but we don't have time for it. It encouraged me to say, take my training in writing things behaviorally specific and apply it to, you know, make the same assumptions. Just like you can't ask people, are you an alcoholic, do you have delusions of grandeur, you know, do you have schizophrenic symptoms? You can't ask people, have you been raped, have you been coerced into sex against your will? They're not specific enough. People don't know what you're talking about. So I wrote the survey initially to just be a behaviorally specific way of asking people about penetration and a whole spectrum of unwanted sexual acts without using any professional jargon. As a scientist, I put in a question, have you been raped? Have you ever been raped? And when I first got the printout of the results, it was like, oh my God, I've just wasted several years of my life because I'm identifying this rate of rape victims, and this much tinier number says that they've ever been raped. So I've got a real, from a scientific perspective, reliability problem. You ask one way, you get one answer, you ask another way, you get another answer. And then I've had two aha experiences in my career. And this was the first one where I suddenly realized, wait a minute, it's possible that people have penetration experiences against their will, through force, threat of force, or when they are incapacitated, and they don't realize that that's rape, or they don't call it rape. And that's the genesis of the book that came out in 1988 based on this work, and was just reissued in 2019. I never called it rape, which is the Ms. Guide to, fighting, surviving, and avoiding Dave McQueen's rape. So that's where I never called it rape. It came from, and then I moved on to continuing this work right up to the present. Collecting data in 2015.
Yeah. What was the second aha moment in your career?
I knew that was coming. The second aha moment came from having studied women from the community who were recent victims of rape, and interviewing them face-to-face, using nurses or other trained health professionals over a period of 2 years to figure out what was happening in their thought processes and in their ways of seeing the world during their recovery, and how did that correlate with their social, physical, and mental health. Well, the biggest predictor of severe symptoms and long-lasting symptoms was self-blame. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night from one of those awful dreams where it was a head-on car crash. And I woke up and I thought, I'm a clinical psychologist, I should be able to analyze this dream. And so it occurred to me that what my unconscious mind was trying to tell me, preconscious mind, was that we've got an adversarial justice system that purpose is to assign blame, and as a part of assigning blame, to then administer consequences on behalf of societal norms. And on the other side, we have a victim where, to the extent that the process focuses on assigning blame and questioning that is going to lead to feelings, at least to some extent, of self-blame, we've got a car crash. And that's what got me started in being interested in restorative justice, which was in 2000. It was at the end of the 90s. First paper I published was in 2000. It was highly influenced by the work of Kathleen Daly, who was an American, moved to Australia and spent her career at Griffith University. She wrote a very early paper on application of what at that time was called communitarian justice, but in the US that was interpreted as being communist justice. So that's actually where the term restorative justice, kind of its evolution was to avoid being confused with communism.
What a presentation. Why hasn't, given the research that you have done, and I think when all of us here, or David Karp was here a few months ago, and when you hear about restorative justice, it just seems like so obvious that this is a solution that so many people who experience sexual harassment and violence would be looking for. Why hasn't this become something that you see in more universities, and why hasn't this really taken off? And I know that the Obama administration in 2011 really, they
were not helpful.
No, they weren't. But even before that, there wasn't. You would just see like the University of Michigan presented at conferences, and we'd all go, "Oh, okay, cool." Why hasn't this taken off?
Well, it's been government interference across multiple administrations. So I'm not going to put blame on any particular political stripe.